Hello, world, and welcome to the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterland, coming to you from the vacation destination known as Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and this is episode 221. Thanksgiving is on the way. Before you get stuffed with food on that day, I've got an appetizer filled with GenX nostalgia. We're going to start it off by looking back at the super popular and then super infamous pop duo known as Milli Vanilli and their downfall. We're going to go way back in the day, looking back 40 years at the creation and the story of the Calvin and Hobbes comic strips. There's going to be a brand new top 5. It's the return of me versus AI top 5 as we battle it out over the best 1970s movie soundtracks. And there'll be a brand new This Week in History and Time capsule looking back at the creation of the beloved toy, the teddy bear. All of that is coming up right now on episode 221 of the In My Footsteps podcast. So what are we going to talk about this week? Yes, Thanksgiving is coming up, but this show is going to be sponsored by the people that created the heating pad for my destroyed lower back. There was a bit of a mishap at work this week where my right side lower back just totally got wrecked. Thankfully, my boss, Dr. Mike at Mind, Body, Spine Chiropractic, he is part miracle worker, part wizard, but even his skills can't help it if he adjusts my back and fixes it, and then I go right back and do some of the same things that wrecked it in the first place. Luckily, right now, I literally have a heating pad basically tied to my back so that it's just on it. If I had to stand up or sit back down, it's excruciating, but as long as I'm stationary, we're pretty good to go. So yes, don't get old. Nothing good comes from it. No, I'm kidding. It's nothing that some good, fun GenX nostalgia won't help. But before we get into the actual meat of this podcast, I can't start without thanking my Patreon subscribers, Lori, Mary Lou, Ashley, Kevin, Leo, Marguerite, Neglectoid, Crystal, Matt, Dr. Shrimp Porto Chico. Thank you all for being my biggest backers, my biggest supporters, those that literally put their money where their mouth is to support me, my never-ending quest to be a self-sustaining, self-employed content creator, whatever that looks like. Those dreams might get a kick into high gear into 2026. I've got a few things to bring up later at the end of the show when we do some housekeeping. You too can become a Patreon member for $5 a month. You get access to bonus podcast episodes. You get access to the remastered Without a Map live streams. There's also an ever-growing free tier. So if parting with your hard-earned money isn't feasible, and I totally understand that, you can go join for free. But like I said, there'll be plenty of time for housekeeping at the end of the show. I want to get into a segment that is years in the making. I basically was waiting for a certain anniversary to talk about this infamous story. So let's kick off episode 221 of the In My Footsteps podcast with a look back at Milli Vanilli, their big rise, their big fall, and everything in between. There are few stories in music history, at least in my lifetime, that fit the strange but true criteria quite like the story of Milli Vanilli. This group, it's like a punchline now. It's almost like another name for fraud. I was there, though, when this group was real, when they were on their way up. So I lived through this story, and I was waiting for a while to be able to share it, because it's 35 years ago this week that Milli Vanilli had to give back their Grammy Awards for Best New Artist. It was November 20th, 1990, and there was this now infamous press conference where Robert Pilatus and Fabrice Fab Morvan sat at a table and basically said, I guess we have to give these back, handing their Grammys back. It's one of the most infamous scandals in the history of pop culture. But it had to start somewhere. They had to become successful to have such a big fall. Milli Vanilli was the brainchild of a German music producer named Frank Farian. He was also known for creating the 70s disco act Boney M. Boney M achieved their success in the latter half of the 1970s. They sold more than 100 million albums worldwide. Their hit songs were Daddy Cool, Belfast, Ma Baker, and Rivers of Babylon. In the late 1980s, Frank Farian wanted to form a pop group that could capitalize on the dance, pop, and R&B trends that were dominating the charts. This is where he discovered Rob Pilatus and Fab Morvan, two young, handsome dancers and aspiring musicians living in Munich, Germany. Pilatus was born in Munich to a German mother and African-American soldier, and Morvan was born in Paris to Caribbean parents. They both had the looks, charisma, and stage presence. Frank Farian believed that they could sell records. The problem was, despite their look and everything else, they didn't have the voice. This is kind of immediately where the problems are, because rather than let that be an obstacle where Farian takes Rob and Fab and says, well, you're good-looking guys, but I need people that are good-looking and can sing, he decided that he would have other singers record the music and have Pilatus and Morvan perform as the public faces of the project. This is one of those things, if this happened today in the 2020s, there'd immediately be the meme with a face kind of saying, what's the worst that could happen? I'm sure Frank Farian thought this group that he called Milli Vanilli might have some success. I don't know if he or anyone involved in this project could have guessed how big they got. Their debut album, Girl You Know It's True, was released in Europe in November 1988 under the title All or Nothing. Then on March 7th, 1989, the album was released in the United States. It became an instant smash. I was 11 years old. I can attest to the fact that all of a sudden, Milli Vanilli was everywhere. On Cape Cod, we had our stations 106 WCOD, which is still around. We had Cape 104.7. Those were more of the top 40 stations. And it was just all of a sudden, there was the songs, Girl You Know It's True, Blame It on the Rain, Girl I'm Gonna Miss You, Baby Don't Forget My Number. It had the infectious dance beats, slick production, and in a world at the time where there were major R&B acts like Bobby Brown, Janet Jackson, Luther Vandross, Michael Jackson, in a world where there were all of these different acts, Milli Vanilli carved their own niche. They became major players. A lot of that came to the influence of MTV. Because you hear the songs on the radio, oh, these are great. Then you see the videos on MTV, and it's these two super good-looking guys with the braided hair, flashy clothes. They had the dynamic dance moves. It all looks very 80s today, but that was the style then. You look at them and you hear the songs and you're like, oh man, here we go. Another mega super act has burst onto the scene. They almost instantly became teen idols, performing to packed arenas and appearing on every major music television show. By the time the calendar turned to 1990, Milli Vanilli had sold more than 7 million copies of their album in the US alone. They were nominated for and then won the Grammy for Best New Artist in February 1990. To the average person, or to someone like me who was 12 years old, it was like, wow, Milli Vanilli, the sky's the limit for them. Behind the scenes, their downfall had already begun, and to some people, they probably didn't even realize it happened. So rumors had long circulated that Milli Vanilli didn't actually sing on their records. During live performances, some people noticed inconsistencies in their vocals, awkward attempts to mimic the recorded tracks. The rumors and the scandal erupted publicly on July 21st, 1989, when Milli Vanilli was performing at a live MTV concert at Lake Compounce Amusement Park in Connecticut. This is now one of the most infamous moments in music history, where during the song Girl You Know It's True, the vocal track began to skip repeatedly on the words Girl You Know It's. So suddenly the song's going and it's just Girl You Know It's, Girl You Know It's, Girl You Know It's. And the pair, Rob and Fab, they panicked. They ran off stage. There's video of it. To everyone that was there or to everyone that was watching, I mean, this raised immediate suspicions. But if you hadn't been watching it, there was no social media, there was no internet, there was no smartphones, texting. So if you didn't see it, you probably didn't know. And that meant that Milli Vanilli's fame and everything, their rise went unchecked for many more months. It's up to you to decide kind of who was to blame for the fall of Milli Vanilli. So what happened was, all the rumors were out there, Rob and Fab went to Frank Farian and said, we want to sing ourselves on the next album. And he was basically like, nah, that's not going to happen. So they threatened to go public to tell the people that they weren't the singers. So on November 14th, 1990, Frank Farian came out and basically dropped the bomb. He admitted that he created Milli Vanilli, that Rob and Fab had not sung a single note on Girl You Know It's True. He even introduced the actual real musicians, the real studio singers, Charles Shaw, John Davis, Brad Howell, and others. You think that today cancel culture is a big thing? Back in 1990, within days of Farian's confession, Arista Records dropped Milli Vanilli, deleted their album from its catalog. It basically wiped them off the face of the earth. Only a few days later, on November 19th, 1990, the Recording Academy took the unprecedented step of revoking Milli Vanilli's Grammy Award. Then it was the next day that Rob and Fab had the press conference where they gave back the awards. There were lawsuits that followed. More than 10 million people were offered refunds for their purchases of Girl You Know It's True. The public backlash was intense. Rob and Fab had been adored, major stars, and overnight they became the objects of ridicule, symbols of the manufactured nature of pop stardom. To me as a kid at 13 years old, I just looked at Rob and Fab and were like, oh, look at those frauds. I didn't know the story behind it. They basically had been set up to fail. It was like, you dance to this music and lip sync it, otherwise we'll destroy you. Despite the fall from grace after the scandal, Rob and Fab tried to redeem themselves. They took vocal lessons and they recorded an album titled Rob and Fab. It was released on March 29th, 1993. But despite their efforts to kind of redeem themselves, maybe clear their name, the album Rob and Fab sold 2,000 copies. Interestingly, the real singers, the real people behind Milli Vanilli, they released their own album in 1991 under the name The Real Milli Vanilli, entitled The Moment of Truth. This album had minor, and I mean minor, success, selling less than 100,000 copies worldwide. So basically, coming out of this, Frank Farian destroyed the careers and sometimes the lives of everybody involved in Milli Vanilli. When it came to Rob and Fab, their fall from grace was really bad. Rob Pilatus faced drug problems and legal troubles throughout the 90s. Tragically, on April 2nd, 1998, he was found dead in a Frankfurt hotel from an apparent accidental overdose of alcohol and prescription pills. He was only 32 years old. Fab Morvan, he has had a bit of a comeback story. So he managed to recover. He eventually carved out a modest solo career. He became a motivational speaker and musician. What's cool, and it gives it kind of a little bit of a happy ending, is within the last week, Fab Morvan was nominated for a Grammy, for real, for himself. It's for Best Audiobook Narration and Storytelling, for his memoir, You Know It's True, The Real Story of Milli Vanilli. I just found that out when researching for this podcast, and I am pulling so bad for him to win this award. Because as much as Milli Vanilli became a punchline in pop culture, it's hard to not feel bad for Rob and Fab. If you were in that position and some guy came to you and said, how would you like to dance and lip sync to this music and make millions and millions and have tons of fans? How many of you would say no? And by the time they were in and by the time they were successful, it was too late. Frank Farian basically had them by the balls. He was like, you be my puppets or else I'm going to expose you and you'll be the one that gets the blame, not me. The Milli Vanilli scandal reshaped the way that the music industry approached authenticity. It sparked public debates about lip syncing, ghost singing, the power of image over substance. It also prompted record labels to be more transparent about the use of studio musicians and backing tracks. In recent times, Milli Vanilli has seen a resurgence in interest with documentaries like Milli Vanilli, The True Story, which was out on Paramount Plus in 2023. I just talked about Fab Morvan's memoirs that he's up for a Grammy for. And if you listen to the music still holds up. I listen to it, it brings me positive memories of my childhood. Although I will admit, every time I hear it, I can't not think about the fact that it's not Rob and Fab, it's studio musicians, but still. What about you out there? If you're around my age, do you remember the Milli Vanilli scandal? Did you like their music before it came out, that they weren't really singing? How about you younger listeners that weren't alive when this scandal happened? What's your opinion on Milli Vanilli and their music? Because even though their time at the top was brief, the legacy of Milli Vanilli endures. It's a warning and a window into the complexities of stardom in the modern music industry. This week in history, we are going back 123 years to November 18th, 1902, and the creation of the beloved children's toy, the teddy bear. I'm pretty sure everybody knows what a teddy bear is. It's one of the most iconic and enduring toys in history, and it was born from an unlikely source, a political cartoon about U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. In November 1902, President Theodore Roosevelt accepted an invitation from Mississippi Governor Andrew H. Longino to join a hunting trip in the woods near Onward, Mississippi. The trip was meant as both leisure and a political gesture, as the governor hoped to smooth tensions within his state's Democratic Party. The other hunters in Roosevelt's party had great success tracking bears, but the president had not yet shot one. To help him, Roosevelt's attendants, including Holt Collier, who was a former enslaved man and expert bear tracker, cornered and tied a black bear to a tree. They offered Roosevelt the chance to shoot it, but when he saw the frightened, injured animal bound and defenseless, he refused. Roosevelt declared it unsportsmanlike to kill the bear under such conditions. Word of Roosevelt's refusal spread quickly. On November 16, 1902, the Washington Post published a political cartoon drawn by Clifford Berryman titled "Drawing the Line in Mississippi." The illustration showed Roosevelt turning away from a small, cowering bear cub, with the caption referencing his decision not to shoot the animal. The cartoon became instantly famous, portraying Roosevelt as a man of fairness, compassion, and principle. Across the country, people were charmed by the story of Teddy's bear. It was only a matter of time before someone capitalized on the public's fascination. In Brooklyn, New York, a Russian-Jewish immigrant couple named Morris and Rose Mitchum ran a small candy shop. Inspired by the newspaper cartoon, they created a soft, stuffed bear and displayed it in their store window with a sign that read, "Teddy's Bear." The toy immediately drew attention. Before selling the bears, though, Morris Mitchum wrote to the White House seeking Roosevelt's permission to use his name. The president replied that he did not object, though he did not formally endorse the product either. With that, the first Teddy's Bears were sold, and their popularity spread rapidly. The Mitchums soon founded the Ideal Novelty and Toy Company, which was one of America's earliest and most successful toy manufacturers. The teddy bear quickly became more than a plaything. By the early 1900s, it symbolized childhood innocence, comfort, and affection. Toy companies all around the world began producing variations, from small hand-sewn bears to luxurious models with movable joints and glass eyes. As Roosevelt's presidency continued, the teddy bear also served as an enduring reminder of his character, a man known for toughness and courage, yet also for his humanity and respect for nature. More than 120 years later, the teddy bear remains one of the most cherished toys ever made. It's inspired stories, songs, even cultural traditions such as teddy bear picnics. Vintage bears from the early Ideal collections are now prized, some of them selling for thousands of dollars. What began as a single act of compassion in the Mississippi woods in 1902 became a timeless symbol of comfort and love, proving that sometimes even a political cartoon can give birth to a global icon. And that first teddy bear was created 123 years ago, this week in history. Let's create a new time capsule. For this week, we're going back to November 18th, 1998, 27 years ago this week. Somehow that time has passed. What was going on in the world of pop culture the week of Thanksgiving in 1998? Well, let's find out. The number one song was Doo-Wop, That Thing by Lauryn Hill. This was off of her album The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. She was the former singer-rapper of the band The Fugees. This album is widely considered one of the best albums of the 90s. I can attest and agree, it is excellent. This song set a lot of standards for female performers. For example, it's the first number one single to be produced by one single female act since Debbie Gibson's Lost in Your Eyes from 1989. It was the first solo debut by a hip-hop artist to debut at number one on the Billboard Hot 100. And it was the only solo song by a female rapper to debut at number one for more than 20 years, until Super Freaky Girl by Nicki Minaj in 2022. Despite being Lauryn Hill's only solo album to this date, it has sold well over 20 million copies worldwide. The number one movie was the Rugrats movie, and you could get into the theater with a ticket costing $4.69. This is the movie based on the Nickelodeon cartoon. The movie was a big hit, making $141 million on a budget of $24 million. Interestingly, the Rugrats movie was supposed to be the first of 3 movies made about Nickelodeon cartoons, with the other ones being Doug and Ren and Stimpy. Neither of those got made, but could you imagine a Ren and Stimpy movie? The cartoon was already gross and pushing boundaries when it was on Nickelodeon. Could you imagine it getting a theatrical release? The number one TV show was ER, because it was the late 90s. That's it, basically. Most of these time capsules I do from the late 90s have ER at number one. But for those that may not know, ER is a medical drama. It was on for 15 seasons, 331 total episodes from 1994 to 2009. In total, ER won 128 industry awards with 442 total nominations. And if you were around back then, Thanksgiving week 1998, I figured I'd give you a little bit of a rundown of what the cost was for the things that you might be getting for your table that year. These things may not be things that you would have on your table, but I was doing my research and I'm like, okay, I'm going to try to cover all my bases. So for example, a 16-pound turkey was approximately $18.28. A 30-ounce can of pumpkin pie mix was $3.12. 14-ounce package of cubed bread stuffing was $2.54. 2 9-inch pie shells, $2.42. A dozen brown and serve rolls, or as my Nana would call them, nice warm rolls, $2.17. A half pint of whipping cream, probably Cool Whip as my Nana would get, was $2. 1 gallon of whole milk was $3.76. 3 pounds of sweet potatoes was $3.56. A pecan pie was $3.83. All of those together would be $33.09. I don't know how many of you would be happy with that setup on Thanksgiving. Turkey, stuffing, rolls, and then a pie with whipped cream. All right, I'm good. But there you have it. the end of a brand new time capsule, the end of a new This Week in History. Now, much like Thanksgiving is a tradition, we're returning to the tradition of me versus AI Top 5. For this installment, we're going to be looking at the best 1970s movie soundtracks. You be the judge of whose list is better, coming up now. Ah, yes, it is the return of that tradition, me versus AI Top 5. This is the 5th installment of the Top 5 show, where me and ChatGPT go back and forth about our picks on different subjects. We've done such things as 90s TV show themes, underrated New England towns. This will be something that will probably become a mixtape episode in the future. All of my me versus AI top 5s. For this week's one, we're looking at best 1970s movie soundtracks. The only rules for this top 5 is that it had to be a movie soundtrack released in the years 1970 through 1979. That's it. I told ChatGPT that, and that's what they had to go on. There was no special stipulations on it. I wanted to see exactly what they picked. With the me versus AI top 5s, there are no honorable mentions because it's going to be two top 5s battling it out. So let's get to it. We're going to start with me, my top 5. But I will say, at least with mine, my top 5 is in no particular order. So let's kick off my top 5 best 1970s movie soundtracks with number 1, Saturday Night Fever. In my mind, there was really none other that I could start with. This is like the defining disco soundtrack, much like I would say the soundtrack to the movie Singles is the defining grunge music soundtrack. This soundtrack could also kind of double as a Bee Gees album with Stayin' Alive, How Deep Is Your Love, Night Fever, Jive Talkin', More Than a Woman. I mean, these are all defining disco era songs. But then you've also got the hits like If I Can't Have You by Yvonne Elliman, Disco Inferno by the Tramps, and the classic disco instrumental A Fifth of Beethoven. The soundtrack has sold more than 40 million copies worldwide. Number 2 is Rocky. Oh boy, the classic boxing movie with Sylvester Stallone from 1976. This has the famous, probably one of the most popular workout songs ever, Gonna Fly Now, aka the Rocky theme. You can hear it in your head. Bill Conti was the man behind so much of the music from not just the original Rocky, but most of the franchise. There are other songs. There's other great workout songs like Going the Distance, which is usually shown during actual boxing matches. There were songs with lyrics to it, though, like Take You Back, which they're singing on the street corner in this movie, and it's sung by Sylvester Stallone's brother Frank. The soundtrack has sold more than 1 million copies in the United States. I couldn't find its worldwide take, but for the iconic theme to Rocky alone, it had to be on my list. Speaking of iconic themes, number 3 is Grease. This is from 1978. It has the theme song Grease, sung by Frankie Valli, ironically written by Barry Gibb of the Bee Gees, and just like Saturday Night Fever had John Travolta as the star, so does Grease. There are so many catchy songs in this. You're the One That I Want, Summer Nights. Most of these songs are carried by Olivia Newton-John. John Travolta is just there adding his adequate vocals. This movie was a massive hit. The album was a massive hit, selling more than 30 million copies worldwide, and is a huge favorite of all 3 of my sisters, so I couldn't not put this on my list. Number 4 is American Graffiti. This is a 1973 film. It stars people like Ron Howard, Harrison Ford, Richard Dreyfuss, but the soundtrack is legendary. There are so many major hits from the late 1950s, early 60s. Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and the Comets, 16 Candles by the Crests, Runaway by Del Shannon, That'll Be the Day by Buddy Holly and the Crickets, Surfin' Safari by the Beach Boys. There's a ton. It's a 2 CD set with 41 songs. This album has sold more than 3 million copies worldwide and is highly recommended for people that are fans of music of that time frame. And finally, number 5 on my list of top 5 best 1970s movie soundtracks is Star Wars. It's the only one that doesn't have any songs with lyrics to them, but the music is legendary. This is one of the greatest movies ever made, 1977, sci-fi classic. I can just name some of the song titles for the score and you know the scenes. You all know the main title. You can hear it. You can see the crawl going by. You all know the Imperial March. That's Darth Vader's theme. You can probably hear the music for the Cantina Band. You can hear Princess Leia's theme. You can hear the theme for the Land of the Sand People. This album was composed and conducted by the legend John Williams. If you don't know John Williams, he's composed like everything that has a great score. Jaws, E.T., Indiana Jones, the first 3 Harry Potter films, Home Alone, Jurassic Park, the original Superman. The original Star Wars album has sold close to 2 million copies worldwide, but copies sold doesn't equal how legendary all the music is in this film. So there you go. Those are my top 5 best 1970s movie soundtracks. As is tradition, we are going to have ChatGPT's answers here for their top 5. Now, I normally have them read by either Bonsai Buddy or Dr. Spatzo. I figured for this 5th installment, I would have them battle it out over who's going to read them.
Okay. I think I should be the one sharing ChatGPT's answers, since I am a cute purple monkey, not some sad old crusty MS-DOS loser like Spatzo.
You stupid monkey, this is my chance at a big comeback. I will turn you into sausage, before I let you steal my moment.
Look, Grandpa, I will slap the age spots off your raisin face if you don't back off and let me do my thing.
Oh, so you want to play rough, do you, Bonsai? Okay, fine. That means a beer bottle to your head, and you will still get made into sausage. Got it?
This is getting ugly. Okay, before one of you deletes the other, let's just have you both each read 2, and then for number 5, I'll just have some rando voice that I'll go find. Does that make you both happy?
Okay, fine, that is fair. Let's get started.
Fine if I have no choice. Go ahead, you ass-bitched monkey.
Yeah, well, fine. Get to it. Time is money, and I'm not paying you much, so let's go. Start reading them.
Number 1, Saturday Night Fever. This soundtrack defined the disco era. The Bee Gees songs like Staying Alive, Night Fever, and How Deep Is Your Love became instant classics, turning the album into a global phenomenon. It not only sold over 40 million copies but also made disco a worldwide craze. The soundtrack was so influential that it overshadowed the movie itself, and its rhythmic pulse became the heartbeat of late 70s pop culture.
Number 2, Star Wars. John Williams' orchestral score for Star Wars revitalized interest in grand, symphonic films at a time when many movies were using pop or rock soundtracks. The instantly recognizable domain title theme and the Imperial March became cultural touchstones. Williams' use of leitmotifs, distinct musical themes for characters or ideas, gave Star Wars a mythic, operatic quality that elevated the entire genre of science fiction cinema.
Number 3, The Godfather. Riva's haunting, melancholic score perfectly captures the tragedy and dignity of the Corleone family saga. The iconic love theme from The Godfather evokes both the beauty and the corruption of the world Francis Ford Coppola built. The music's Italian folk-inspired melodies gave the film emotional depth and authenticity, becoming one of the most recognizable and enduring pieces of film music in history.
Number 4, American Graffiti. This soundtrack is a time capsule, early rock and roll, using 1950s and early 1960s hits to create a nostalgic atmosphere. George Lucas used the music, Not just as background but as a storytelling device, every scene is underscored by a song playing on the radio. It set the template for future soundtracks like Forrest Gump and Guardians of the Galaxy, showing how carefully curated pop hits could serve as emotional and cultural anchors in film.
Alright, you did well so far with the first four. Now let's bring in your stunt double or replacement or whatever the hell this thing is to read the final one, number 5. Get to it, you.
Number 5, A Star is Born. This soundtrack captured the emotional highs and lows of fame and love. With Streisand's evergreen love theme from A Star is Born winning the Academy Award for Best Original Song, the album topped charts and became a defining moment in Streisand's career, blending rock, pop, and ballads in a way that mirrored the turbulence of the 1970s music scene. Its success proved that a soundtrack could stand on its own as a powerful musical statement.
And there you go. There is ChatGPT's top 5, read by Dr. Spatzo, Bonsai Buddy, and whatever the hell that foolish last one was. Do you have any other final words, Spatzo and Bonsai, before I put you back in the closet in mothballs till the next time I need you?
The pleasure was all yours, podcast host. Oh, and don't bother asking Spatzo his final thoughts. He had an unfortunate accident involving some marbles on the floor when he was hobbling his old ass out of the bathroom. He is now at the bottom of the stairs, still twitching a little, but that should end soon.
Thank you so much for having me on. I am a big fan of Bonsai Buddy, but not so much of the mean old guy who smells like mothballs. He sounds like he needs a big glass of prune juice and a nap.
I am not dead yet. Please somebody, call an ambulance, and...
Alright, so that was the end of Best 1970s Movie Soundtracks Top 5. Now we're going to go back to the 1980s, and we're going to look at one of the best loved but also short-lived comic strips, and that is Calvin and Hobbes, which is celebrating its 40th anniversary this week. Cast your mind back to November the 17th, 1985. Me, I was 8 years old. You pick up your local newspaper, you turn to the comics or the funnies or whatever you called them. You've got Peanuts, Garfield, Andy Cap, Doonesbury, Shoe, High and Lois, Family Circus, For Better or For Worse, Beetle Bailey. You might have even had Snuffy Smith, which was one of my Nana's favorites. Little did I know, or maybe you know, on November 17th, 1985, that the next day, a brand new comic strip would debut, and it would be one of the most beloved, artistically ambitious, but also short-lived, relatively, comic strips of all time. The name of this comic was Calvin and Hobbes. It was created by Bill Watterson. It ran for only a decade, which really in comics is not that long. I just mentioned Snuffy Smith. That is still around. It's been around for 100 years. It's like, how many stories can you tell of that guy? And he never ages. Calvin and Hobbes, though, it changed how cartoonists thought about newspaper space and merchandising. It left a lasting cultural and artistic legacy, despite Watterson's deliberate refusal to commercialize his characters. Yes, I know a lot of you out there, especially younger, might only know Calvin, the boy from Calvin and Hobbes, as the sticker some people have on their windows of him peeing on something. But in the reality of it, go look up Calvin and Hobbes merchandise. There's really nothing that's official, maybe knockoff stuff. So celebrating the 40th anniversary of the launch, the creation of Calvin and Hobbes, we're going to do a little deep dive into the comic, into Bill Watterson, and into the impact of Calvin the boy and his pet tiger Hobbes. Bill Watterson, the man behind Calvin and Hobbes, grew up in Chagrin Falls, Ohio. He studied political science at Kenyon College, where he edited the college newspaper. He began cartooning professionally in the late 1970s and early 80s, creating strips that were submitted to syndicates. After several attempts and reworkings, Universal Press Syndicate picked up Calvin and Hobbes, which debuted on November 18th, 1985 in 35 newspapers. This means that even if you were around back then like me, your newspaper likely did not pick up Calvin and Hobbes on its first day. But within a few years after it debuted, its circulation exploded. Watterson's influences included Charles Schulz of Peanuts fame, Walt Kelly of the comic strip Pogo, and a long tradition of newspaper cartooning. He combined that lineage with his own interest in fine art and maintaining creative control. Big fans and longtime readers of Calvin and Hobbes will know that the strip was meant to be more than gags. It was to explore imagination, childhood, philosophy, and visual storytelling. Who were the characters, though? Calvin was a precocious, anarchic 6-year-old named after the theologian John Calvin, which was more or less, it was a naming joke, not a statement of belief. Hobbes was Calvin's stuffed tiger, who appears to be alive and animated to Calvin and as an inanimate toy to adults. The Hobbes device lets the strip play constantly with perspective and conversations which would range from silly to philosophical. I always thought of it as the idea of me growing up. I had my share of stuffed animals. I'm sure a lot of you did. You didn't just sit there and throw them against the wall. I'm sure there are times that you sat with whatever stuffed animal you had and spoke to it like it was a real person. And that was a lot of Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin speaking with Hobbes about deeper subjects, and Hobbes, the tiger, giving him back information, advice. There were a lot of recurring motifs in the Calvin and Hobbes comic strips. There were sled and wagon rides, which were comic physicality and a metaphor. Transmogrifier duplicator boxes, Calvin's school and teacher, Miss Wormwood, Susie Durkins, Calvin's foil and occasional friend/romantic sparring partner. There were imaginative space adventures like Spaceman Spiff, dinosaurs and caveman fantasies, and frequent riffs on consumer culture and adult hypocrisy. It was interesting to me. I didn't see Calvin and Hobbes when it first came out in 1985 because living on Cape Cod, I don't think the Cape Cod Times newspaper picked it up right away. But I do remember reading it, and it was different to me because it made me think. I would have been, 8, 9, 10 years old. I could fly through Peanuts and Garfield, and a lot of the jokes were just right in front of you. Calvin and Hobbes, you'd read it. Sometimes if they were sledding or if something physical was going on, you'd be like, oh, I get the joke, and you'd move on. Other times you'd get Calvin speaking to Hobbes, and it would be things you'd have to read a few times, like, what is he talking about? While the early daily strips were conventional in size and layout, over time Watterson pushed the boundaries of the newspaper format. He fought for and won the right to print his Sunday strips and many dailies in larger, unbroken formats so that he could compose scenes free of the standard box constraints used by newspapers and other strips. I can only imagine that must have pissed off a lot of other comics at the time, that Calvin and Hobbes got kind of preferential treatment, but it's more or less because Watterson pushed for it. I'm sure if Jim Davis or Charles M. Schulz had pushed to have their strips made differently, the newspapers would have allowed it. That was a big thing with Calvin and Hobbes, was Watterson's popularity with the strip allowed him to maintain this creative control. It was like you either do it the way he wants it to be done, or he'll just take it out of your newspaper. One of the defining chapters in Calvin and Hobbes' history is Watterson's refusal to commercialize his characters. When Universal Press Syndicate discovered that Watterson's original contract allowed the syndicate to license merchandise, Watterson fought to stop it, or at least to gain veto power so nothing that was crappy got out. No Calvin and Hobbes toilet plunger or anything like that. There was a bit of a struggle and some animosity on each side, but that contract was renegotiated so Watterson retained effective control over licensing. This meant that he famously resisted turning Calvin and Hobbes into plush toys, lunchboxes, cereal prizes, or any other tie-ins, arguing that merchandising would cheapen the strip's imaginative life and undermine the reader's internal relationship to Hobbes as a stuffed toy / imaginary friend. This stance led to Watterson getting admiration from readers who revered the strip's integrity, but also frustration from some colleagues who felt that merchandising was a practical route for income for the cartoonists. Producing comic strips is grueling. I can only speak as a content creator about doing weekly podcasts and YouTube videos and blogs and any other marketing and promotion of my work. I can only imagine being someone like Watterson who's having this majorly successful comic strip and it's daily. What he did to battle against that was he negotiated sabbaticals with his syndicate, which was unusual. In fact, despite Calvin and Hobbes only running for 10 years, there were 2 major sabbaticals in there. 2 periods of 9 months each from May 1991 to February 1992, and then April 1994 through the end of that year. There were no new Calvin and Hobbes strips. It was reruns / classics, while Watterson rethought and redesigned the strip's form, and obviously recharged his battery. By the late 80s and early 90s, Calvin and Hobbes had become a cultural phenomenon. The fact that it wasn't widely merchandised made it something that it was almost like the cool kids read. Anybody could go and get stuffed Snoopies and Garfields, or see these cartoons on TV. Calvin and Hobbes was different. It bucked the system. You had to read the Sunday comics, and that was it. I won't lie, when I was a kid reading Calvin and Hobbes, a lot of the times I wished I could have had a stuffed Hobbes, or that there was some kind of other way to get more of the content, whether it was a cartoon or anything, action figures to create your own adventures. But looking back, it's so much respect for Watterson for sticking to his principles. He used Calvin and Hobbes the strip to address not just childhood antics, but serious subjects. The commodification of culture, environmental themes, like with Calvin and Hobbes in the Woods, existential musings, satire of adult stupidity. And then academics, philosophers, and educators took notice. The strip began to be cited in courses and essays about imagination and childhood. It's always referenced in pop culture, exhibited in galleries. Despite them not being widely commercialized, there are anthologies and collections of the Calvin and Hobbes strips. And of course, true to form, there is no official Calvin and Hobbes website. There is a fan page, calvinandhobbes.webflow.io, and you can read the strips at gocomics.com/Calvin and Hobbes. On November 9th, 1995, Watterson informed his syndicate and editors that he intended to end Calvin and Hobbes at the end of that year, because he felt he had taken the strip where he wanted to go and didn't want to keep extending it past its natural life. The final original Calvin and Hobbes strip ran on December 31st, 1995, and shows Calvin and Hobbes sledding through fresh snow as Calvin declares, "Let's go exploring." It's this quiet, simple, open-ended farewell that encapsulated the themes of wonder and imagination that defined the Calvin and Hobbes strip. For people like me, I was a senior in high school. I had just turned 18, and Calvin and Hobbes was gone, and it was almost like they were telling you with that strip, go outside and explore. Life is not meant to be just sitting inside, reading comics. That being said, Calvin and Hobbes, much like The Far Side, another of my all-time favorites, ending early was really sad because I had gotten used to that daily dose of entertainment. After ending Calvin and Hobbes, Watterson retreated from public life. Over the 30 years since the strip has ended, he's rarely given interviews, only made a handful of public appearances. And all of those interviews he does, they're overly examined and mined for insight into his attitudes about art, comics, and everything else. Despite only being around for 10 years and being gone for 30, Calvin and Hobbes left a major legacy with its artistic ambition, with the literary and philosophical range of the comic strips, a model of artistic integrity, with Watterson fighting to have Calvin and Hobbes exactly as he wanted it, and he wouldn't take anything less. The strips have also aged very well. If you've never read Calvin and Hobbes, you can go and pick up from anywhere and read it. It's not serialized so much, but they're kind of evergreen. We'll end this with the question I'm sure a lot of you have. Where did the Calvin peeing sticker come from? In my research, I found that it came out shortly around the time right after Calvin and Hobbes ended. It was a bootleg. It's still a bootleg item. It's possibly based on a comic with Calvin filling a water balloon, but it was first mentioned in a Florida newspaper, and it was first widely seen in the St. Petersburg Times with Calvin peeing on the letters FSU for Florida State. That's where it became a sign to disrespect your sports opponent. Calvin and Hobbes is an unusual thing in modern pop culture, that it achieved massive success and influence while resisting the usual commercial expansions. Bill Watterson's combination of technical skill, narrative empathy, humor, and firm artistic principles produced a strip that rewards repeated reading. Like I said, I used to blow through Garfield and Peanuts in one read. I would need to do it repeatedly for Calvin and Hobbes. And when it ended on December 31st, 1995, it left a comics page landscape and a legion of readers changed. And I think it started to signal the end of that golden age of the Sunday comics in newspapers. So cheers to Calvin and Hobbes that debuted 40 years ago this week in history. But until next week, that's going to wrap up episode 221 of the In My Footsteps podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for making it to the end. I hope you enjoyed your weekly dose of GenX nostalgia. With next week being Thanksgiving week, I thought of it as the perfect time to whip out a new mixtape that I created recording off the radio just for you, like back in the day. Mixtape number 2 is going to be Dedication to the Craft. All of the photography segments so far. There'll be some laughs, some head shaking, and maybe you might actually learn something about photography. Probably not from me, but probably from my buddy Steve in the interview I did with him way back in episode 14. We come back the week after, though, episode 222, to start December, where we're going to look back at the life and times of iconic heavy metal OG Godfather Ozzy Osbourne. We're going to maybe learn some stuff as we look back at a funny and weird Subway restaurant's employee training video from the early 1990s. So that'll be in 2 weeks. We come back with episode 222. This week's episode here took me a while to get through. I've literally got a heating pad tied to my back. It's funny, but it's not funny because it really hurts. But I have a belt that's got this dang heating pad tied to me so I can record this and not scream in pain every time I lean forward. I'm like one more low back injury away from either getting one of those motorized scooters that I can just ride around on, or investing in bubble wrap to wrap myself in. It's like 2025 has been one long injury-plagued season of my career. This is my third low back injury, the worst one so far, just of this year. And longtime listeners, you remember earlier this year, I sprained my ankle pretty bad playing basketball. I nearly broke both of my hands. Really? It's like I train people to have better active lives, but yet I can't bend over to look at sliced meat in the deli without my low back exploding. So I mentioned housekeeping stuff at the beginning of the show. I have started to book out author events, speaking events for 2026. I took all of this year off, and I'm immediately getting started on getting back out there, promoting my new book, In Their Footsteps, the interesting people, places, and events of Cape Cod history. The first one that I've got officially booked with a date is at the Eldridge Library in Chatham on Wednesday, March 4th at 1 p.m. I've got several more in the works, and I've got a whole bunch of more ones to reach out to. You can get your copy of the book. I created a landing page for the book. That's in the podcast notes. You can also go to Amazon. When 2026 starts, I've mentioned that I'm going to be getting help totally revising my website, ChristopherSetterland.com. My oldest friend Barry, who created the website and has been updating it since like 2008, he doesn't do that stuff anymore. He's been doing it just for me. So he's going to kind of teach me how to update the website, and then he's going to let me go on my own. We'll see if I fly out of the nest or if I slam dunk myself on the concrete. I couldn't end this episode of the podcast without giving a special birthday shout out to my sister Kate, second in line out of us 5 kids. Besides being my sister and someone that I can always count on in life, I can also credit her for creating 3 of my favorite people on this planet, my 2 nieces Kaylee and Emma and my nephew Landon. I hope this birthday is the best one yet, the best it can be. And you know, if you ever need me, your foolish, crazy older brother, I'm always here. So happy birthday, Kate. I am going to go lay down with a heating pad on my back so that I can be healed just in time to go back to work until the day that I am a totally self-sufficient content creator. Who knows when that'll be, but I keep pushing for it. A lot of that comes down to you. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Thank you to my Patreon subscribers. Thank you to those who share my content, whether it's this podcast, YouTube videos, the blogs, my books, anything with my burgeoning film career. I'm everywhere. But until next time, remember, in this life, don't walk in anyone else's footsteps. Create your own path and enjoy every moment you can on this journey we call life, because you never know what tomorrow brings. This has been the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterland, but you already knew that. And I'll talk to you all again soon.